You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are talking Urban Meyer today. We will talk a little bit about the college football playoff, a little bit of Buckeye basketball, and, of course, previewing Ohio State, Nebraska with Sean Callahan, publisher of Husker Online. They are the affiliate for the Rivals Network covering Nebraska. So, Ohio State, Nebraska talk coming up a little bit later, and Buckeye basketball, I'll break down if you didn't see it, and I'm guessing most of you did not, because the only way to see it was either to attend in person or drop $10 for a monthly subscription for BTN Plus. But if you did not see the Ohio State exhibition win over UNC Pembroke, then I will break that down later in the show as well. So, I'm going to jump right into it. Urban Meyer, this is the talk of Ohio State fans here this week. You probably saw him call this impromptu press conference with a couple members of the media. My man Austin Ward, Tim May, Doug Maurice, they were involved with this little impromptu gathering where Urban Meyer basically clarified his medical situation. And it was kind of a good news, bad news situation for the Buckeyes and Buckeye fans, because on one hand, he was pretty blunt and straightforward that all this crap that we're hearing in the media, all these reports of him being unhappy with the Ohio State administration, unhappy and on bad terms with people in the athletic department. Look, all of that is Brett McMurphy level reporting once again, okay? There's nothing to that, and I think in part Urban wanted to make that clear that there are no issues on his end with anybody at Ohio State right now. And maybe, maybe there's still a little bit of ill will in the back of his mind with President Drake or members of the trustees who basically made a big deal out of this after saying, he wasn't suspended for these reasons, but yet he was punished as if he was suspended for those reasons. So, look, I'm not going to say that Urban Meyer has everybody in the Ohio State administration on the Board of Trustees, including President Drake. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that maybe they're going to be on his Christmas card list this upcoming year. But when push comes to shove, I think it's clear, just listening to his words and how, how much he wanted to set the record straight, I don't think that's an issue. Now, here's where the bad news comes in. The bad news is he does legitimately have some medical issues that I think Ohio State fans need to be concerned about. I think these headaches, even though they're something that he's been living with for many years, when you come out and say, and you have your doctor come out and say that these have been getting progressively worse the last couple of years, that's not something you want to hear. We saw Urban Meyer go to one knee in the Indiana game, and that was something we had not seen before. At the time, it was reported as if, maybe he got hit on the sidelines and, got bumped in the head, and that caused some pain. But it turns out that's because of these headaches. Now, it was just one time, so I don't want to overreact that because he went down to one knee in a game we had never seen that therefore this is something really scary and this is going to be getting way worse. It may have just been timing where it doesn't happen frequently, but it happened to catch him in the game at that moment in time. I don't know the level of frequency that these headaches are going on, but what I do know is, it's fair to say that maybe stress can bring on some additional pain from these types of situations. I know when I have a headache, if I'm stressed, it makes it worse, and so I don't have the medical situation that Urban Meyer has with this cyst in his head. So I can certainly imagine that additional stress of the season, whether it be from the suspension or now the way Ohio State has played at times defensively as well as offensively with the run game, I could see how maybe the stress is bringing on these headaches, a little bit worse than he's experienced in the past. So that is a concern, not so much that we have to worry about what's happening off the field with him and what's going on a daily basis with his job status, and how he thinks about his environment that he's working in. But it is a concern because those issues, even if they are minor, could make the medical issues that much more serious. So here's what I think Ohio State fans should be looking at this situation and be very concerned about it, just because, hey, look, he took a year off at Florida because he was having a lot of stress and it was causing issues with his heart. And now it's a situation where a lot of stress could bring on more issues with the cyst. So it's something I would keep an eye on. I think it's too soon and too premature to go out and say, well, Urban Meyer is done after this year. I don't think that kind of decision has been made. But I think it is something that if it gets worse, look, legitimately, you can understand if this guy has to hang it up because of those issues. And I don't think it's going to get to that this year. It might. I don't know. But while I do not believe there are any issues with him and the administration or trustees or athletic department, I don't think those are something to be concerned about. I do think this is an issue to watch. Now, there are some people that are saying and will tell you that maybe this is a pretext, because why would Urban Meyer come out and tell the world about these medical issues, okay? And I have some thoughts on this, and I know one theory that is being speculated is that this is his pretext. This is his excuse, his rationalization to walk away from Ohio State and go coach elsewhere, and thinking that he will get less criticism from walking away from Ohio State if he comes up with a medically justified reason. Let me first state, I think that theory is garbage, and let me explain why. I understand rationally why it makes sense that it would be easier for him to walk away if he had medical justification for doing so. So I can understand why somebody who loves Ohio State so much might use that to his advantage to be able to go to another job without as much criticism. But the problem with that theory is if he leaves Ohio State and then immediately goes to another job, or he takes even 1 year off and goes to another job, do you really think the criticism is going to go away? It's just going to look obvious in that particular situation that he probably used that as an excuse. And, he did the same thing at Florida. He legitimately left for medical reasons, but because he only took 1 year off and came back to Ohio State, he still gets some criticism to this day, especially from the Florida fan base, for walking away. So I don't think that excuse holds any water. I don't think that makes any sense. I think if he were using that as a reason to leave Ohio State, I think it would just wind up catching up with him in the long run. So I don't think that theory makes any sense. I think the real reason he came out with this is twofold. I do think there's an element of him wanting to put that out there that if he leaves Ohio State, it is legitimately for medical reasons and not because of any other of the BS that's out there. I think he's just making it clear. He's just trying to be upfront and say, if I have to step down from coaching, this is the reason why, okay? It's not because I'm unhappy with President Drake or Gene Smith or anybody like that. I think this is just him being straightforward and say, if you're going to try to conjure up reasons for why I don't look right on the sidelines or for why I'm unhappy, this is it right here. It's all medical based, and it's not having to do with anything else. So I think that is his way of saying, don't take it personally if I have to step down. But I mentioned I think there are two reasons, and I do think there's a legitimate second reason here. He's cognizant of the negative recruiting that's going on right now around Ohio State, and a lot of people saying he will step down, that he's unhappy with Ohio State, that sort of thing. I think this is him just trying to control the message with also in the recruiting circles, okay? I think he's coming out and just being straightforward. This is the real reason there's anything going on. And yeah, it might hurt negatively. It might give ammunition for other schools to negatively recruit him and say, well, look, he's got medical issues. He may not be around. But I think this is him controlling the message and just say, look, if you're going to negative recruit me, then at least have your facts straight, because I'm not unhappy with Ohio State. This is where I want to be. This is what I'm going through. Any demeanor you think you see on the sidelines is not on account of me being unhappy with my job. So I really think that there were two reasons he came out with this when he did. Number one, I think he is trying to say, if I have to step down, this is the reason why. And number two, I think he is trying to control, to some extent, the negative recruiting that is going on around him. So bottom line here is I think this is something to keep an eye on. I think it's an issue. I would be concerned about it. I really do think this is something that could knock him out of coaching. I think he may have to step down prematurely if this doesn't get rectified. But I'm also saying slow down. I don't think this has anything to do with him trying to find a way out from Ohio State. I don't think that that is the case whatsoever. And I also don't think it means he's already decided this is going to be his last season. I don't think that's the case at all either. I think if he were truly going through medical issues, honestly, if that is the reason, then I think he would just call it quits right now. I think he would just say, I've got medical issues I need to tend to. Ryan Day is going to have to take over for me the rest of the season as interim coach, but I need to step down and get healthy. So I think that would be the pretext. If he were going to do such a thing, there's no reason to wait this out until the end of the season. But bottom line for me, I think Urban Meyer will probably end up being the coach at Ohio State, but if something happens between now and next season, for whatever reason, if he is not head coach, I don't think it has anything to do with any of these issues or trying to find a way to get another job. I think it's all about his medical condition and whether or not he feels up to the challenge of being the head coach at Ohio State on a day-in, day-out basis. So I want to talk a little bit of football here, but before we preview Ohio State, Nebraska with Sean Callahan, I want to talk about the college football playoff rankings just here for a few minutes. The top of the list, not a big surprise. Well, certainly not a surprise at number one. Alabama was number one in the first college football playoff rankings that came out on Tuesday. Clemson was number two. Those were not a surprise. In a very ever so slight surprise, LSU was number three ahead of Notre Dame. That's not really a shock, but I think most people probably would have figured Notre Dame 3, LSU 4, but it was not the case. LSU, which by the way does have a very good resume, I think that they have, kind of earned being in that top four right now. But they are ahead of Notre Dame. And then in a minor surprise, Michigan is number 5 ahead of Georgia, followed by Oklahoma at 7. And then where a few surprises come in at number 8 and 9, Washington State and Kentucky, and then Ohio State, number 10. So, caveat, these rankings don't really mean anything. And yeah, they are kind of a window into the thought process of the selection committee, ever so slightly. So from that standpoint, they mean a little bit, and I know people will point out, well, they mean something because the same committee is going to have to leapfrog, for instance, Ohio State. If Ohio State wants to move up in the rankings, they're going to have to leapfrog the teams in front of them. Now, I will point out, in 2014, Ohio State started out 16 in the first rankings. They're number 10 in these. So there is still a lot of time left. I would not get hung up on where teams are ranked. Now, that being said, I'm going to kind of contradict myself here, and I'm going to haggle with where teams are ranked just ever so slightly. And the reason being, at the end of the day, if Ohio State wins out, I think it's still getting in the playoff because it's going to be in a top 5 Michigan team if that happens, provided Michigan does not lose to Penn State this weekend, which is a possibility. But I think Ohio State, if it wins out, it will most likely have Michigan State on its resume, and then, of course, a win over the Big Ten West champion, which now looks like it may be Northwestern rather than Wisconsin, which we wouldn't have imagined earlier in the season. But it is starting to look that way, like it could be Northwestern, but still could be Wisconsin as well if Northwestern loses again. So here's the thing. I think Ohio State, if it wins out, I think it's fine. I think it's going to get into that top 4 if they win out. So from that standpoint, Washington State and Kentucky being ahead of the Buckeyes does not really mean a lot to me. But the principle of the matter is there is no person on the face of this earth that thinks Washington State and Kentucky are better than Ohio State. And this is the problem that I have with the college football playoff selection process. I am tickled to death that we have a 4-team model. I think most of you are as well. I personally want to see it to go to 8, but I'm fine with it at 4, provided the selection process is improved. And I don't like this selection process because there is nobody, including the selection committee, that would say Washington State or Kentucky are better than Ohio State. Nobody would say that. But yet, they find ways to do it. You know, it's almost like the selection committee, and we've seen this before, from week to week, from year to year, the criteria changes. They can come up with any rationale from team to team even. Well, this team, we like their profile, their resume. This team played a tough schedule. This team, they passed the eye test. You know, they can give any reason that they want and subjectively say, we believe this team deserves it based on. There is no consistency with how these rankings are formed. And I firmly believe that Kentucky and Washington State are ahead of Ohio State only because it was a chance for the committee to send the message that we don't care about brand names, we just care about this, we just care about that, we just care about putting the most deserving teams in the order that they belong. And we all know that it's baloney. We all know that it's garbage. They don't actually care about those things. And, you know, this is just their chance to do it when it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, when the selection process is made, if we are in these same circumstances, you know they're taking Ohio State over Washington State or Kentucky. And I hate to be cynical because that's not the reason Ohio State got in over TCU in 2014, but it does matter. It's why Alabama got in last year over Ohio State. Even though Ohio State actually, I think for TV ratings, would beat Alabama, it's just that name, Alabama, they had to have them in the playoff because it's the almighty SEC. And I don't like the subjectivity. So, in my opinion, the answer here, take this out of the hands of the selection committee. I say go back to a BCS type of rankings. Remember the BCS rankings, and it had flaws, by the way. I didn't like the BCS. The problem I had with the BCS is they had 2/3 of the score had to do with human polls. It started out with the AP and the coaches poll. And then later, the AP, of course, pulled out from the rankings, and they were replaced by the Harris poll. But you had 2/3 of the school were made up by the votes, and the other third had to do with the computer rankings. And here's the other maddening aspect of the BCS rankings. The computer models, the computer rankings used in the BCS formula, first of all, I didn't like from the standpoint that those computers were adjusted. They did not include margin of victory within the score, which I think is a mistake. I think you have to include margin of victory to some extent. You know, maybe you can cap the margin of victory, but you have to include it because it's relevant. So that was my biggest pet peeve. But the other pet peeve I had is the highest and lowest computer ranking got thrown out for every single team involved in the rankings. But yet, the 67% of the score, the human polls, for some reason, if some idiot had a team that was number 6 overall, but in his personal rankings were number 21, that low score wasn't thrown out. You could have bias in the computers, but for some reason, the BCS officials did not want to account for human bias. It was absolutely astounding to me that they would adjust for bias in computer models, but not adjust for it with the human polls. So that was my pet peeve about the BCS rankings. But those issues aside, I would like to bring that back, and I would like to have a system where maybe you have this selection committee that are watching games all year long and voting. Maybe they have their own rankings and they vote on these teams. Maybe it's a 20-person panel voting or a 30-person, whatever you want to do it. Or you can incorporate something like the Harris poll, but make it people that you know are watching the games. You vote. That account for 30%. Then you have computer models accounting for margin of victory. You could have that a 30% of the score. And then you have maybe 10% of the score assigned to strength of schedule, 10% assigned to strength of record, and then 10% maybe game control, because I know that is a big metric used in the process now. And then the other 10% you can use for a flag for conference champion. So if you win your conference champion, then you get an additional 10% bump in your score. By doing all that, you incorporate scheduling, but you don't make too much of an emphasis on it. You incorporate the eye test, but not too much of an emphasis on it. You incorporate just eyeballing it, okay, as well as the power ratings, which are a good indicator of what is likely to happen going forward. So by putting together an algorithm such as that, you have consistency, thoroughness, and you remove the bias and the subjectivity from the process. I like the 4-team model, although I prefer 8. I would like to see 5 conference champions, a group of 5 get an automatic bid if they're in a certain top 10 or top 15, and then a couple wild cards on top of that. That's the process I would like to go to, but I'm okay with keeping a 4-team model. But for goodness sakes, I'm ready. I'm already done with this selection committee. I don't like the inconsistency. They went away from their own rules last year, even though Alabama may have been better than Ohio State, and maybe they were deserving. They were not deserving according to the committee's own selection protocol, okay? They were not deserving when the very week before, the committee told us that Alabama and Ohio State were in a comparable group. They were comparable teams, and Ohio State goes out, gets a top 4 victory, adds that to its profile by beating an undefeated team. Alabama does not play. Ohio State then becomes a conference champion. And then suddenly, the team that did not play, even though they were comparable the week before, they get the last spot. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like it. I think that inconsistency with their own selection protocol and procedures is proof that we need reform on this process. So I say bring back a BCS type of score, a BCS type of algorithm to select the teams with, and then remove the subjectivity and the bias out of the equation. That's my take. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. These rankings, they don't really mean much in the first week. I'm not overreacting to the rankings themselves. Those will sort themselves out over the next 4 weeks. I'm not concerned about that. I don't care that Kentucky or Washington State is ahead of Ohio State. It doesn't really matter. If the Buckeyes win out, they are going to leapfrog those teams. I am certain of it. So my beef is just about the principle of the matter. I don't like the committee playing games, and that is exactly what this is about. They're just playing games. They're trying to send messages, and they're not taking it seriously. They're just using these preliminary rankings as an opportunity to make some kind of political statement. I don't care for it. Just like I don't care for Texas A&M being number 20 when they're 5-3 with one of their wins over FCS Northwestern State, and the other teams they beat were Louisiana Monroe, or maybe it was Lafayette. I can't remember. I get them mixed up. And South Carolina. And Kentucky is the one good win on their schedule, and Arkansas. That is who Texas A&M has beat so far, and that puts them at 5-3, and somehow that merits them a top 20 ranking by the selection committee. Can you figure it out? If you do, please tell me. Please explain it to me, because I can't figure it out. Anyhow, tweet at me, at KYLam8. I would love to chat about this, urban or basketball. But let's get into some Ohio State-Nebraska preview. Sean Callahan of Husker Online will join me now to preview the game. All right, we're with Sean Callahan of Husker Online now. Sean, how you doing, my man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Looking forward to the weekend in Columbus here.
Yeah, so this Nebraska team is an interesting case. Starting out, 0-6, and then getting a couple wins here last couple weeks. It's probably hard to boil down to one thing, but what has gone wrong with this Nebraska team so far this year?
Well, I mean, it started early. Week 1, their Akron game, a night game at home, got canceled, and that was a big deal just in the sense that they weren't able to have that first game against a lower-level team where they could have just kind of worked some things out. And that piled up to the next week. They played Colorado, and they had a lot of good moments in that Colorado game, but then, you had a lot of moments that kind of went bad, but they were winning 28-20 in that game, had control of it in the fourth quarter. Adrian Martinez, their quarterback, gets hurt in the fourth quarter, and they didn't have a real backup to put in. I mean, a walk-on is who they ended up having to put in because their other quarterback left the program, Tristan Gebbia, the week before. So they blew the lead, lost to Colorado. Then the next week they played Troy, who was an 11-win team the year before, had to start the walk-on, and just played really poor and lost that Troy game. So they got in the hole 0-2 right off the bat. Then they had to go out to Ann Arbor for their third game of the year, and Adrian Martinez just came back off his knee injury, so they were really limited with him out there. And Michigan just physically manhandled him at the line of scrimmage, and so it started off so bad out of the gates, starting with the opening game getting canceled, the Martinez game, but it's progressively gotten better each week. There were a lot of moments in the Purdue game where you could see it coming, but still too many mistakes. They played a really good second half at Wisconsin, put up over 500 yards on the Badgers. They couldn't slow down Melvin Gordon, but had a 10-point lead at Northwestern, blew the 10-point lead in the final 5 minutes of the game the following week. And then they got the Minnesota win where they scored 28 in a row to start that game, and last week against Bethune-Cookman. So it's been a mix of everything. It's probably closer to a 5-3 team. They find themselves at 2-6. Really, Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin are the only three on their schedule that have squarely beat them. Nebraska easily could have won probably 3 of the games they've lost.
What's interesting about this team, Sean, is, statistically speaking, defensively is not very good, but offensively they have moved the ball with no problem, but they're just not punching the ball in the end zone. You compare their scoring offense, about 24 points a game, to their total offense, well over 500 yards a game. They're not having any issues moving the ball. So what is the issue where the points are not necessarily following with the amount that they're actually getting the ball moved down the field?
Well, a lot of it has been penalties and special teams. Nebraska, for a long time, led the nation in penalty yardage. So when you're talking about that yard number you mentioned, over 500 per game, and not very many points to go with it, that's because of those penalties. I mean, on a drive that should be 75 yards, it ends up being 90 yards for Nebraska. So that over the course of the game, when you're averaging 100 penalty yards a game, at least when Nebraska was losing, that's what it was at, about 10 penalties for 100 a game. It makes it that much harder to score points. They also weren't forcing very many turnovers early in the year. Their special teams play was atrocious, so their field position would be really bad. So they were not really having very good fields to score on. So it's been a combination of everything, but you're right, that yard number and the point total never make sense if you just look at it, but a lot of it had to do with the penalties and some of the things that set the offense back early in the year.
This is an interesting matchup this week because Ohio State fans are sitting here looking at this Ohio State team that has had problems running the ball with any regularity whatsoever, and you're looking at a Nebraska defense where probably the rush defense for Nebraska has been the biggest the whole this year for the Cornhuskers as they're giving up almost 175 yards per game. How do you see this playing out this week with the two opposite ends of the spectrum here? Ohio State struggling to run the ball and Nebraska struggling to defend the run.
Yeah, I think Ohio State, over the bye week, my guess is they've really made an emphasis in running the football. I think Urban Meyer knows that if they want to get to where they want to be, and that's beating Michigan and then winning the Big Ten title and going to the playoffs, they're going to have to run the ball better at Ohio State down the stretch. I mean, going for under 100 yards rushing with your tailbacks against Purdue and Minnesota, two teams Nebraska ran the ball at will at, by the way. that's not going to get it done. And I think Urban Meyer knows that. So I think Urban Meyer is going to really emphasize the running game out of the gates, try to go at Nebraska. The one thing to me that's so different about this Ohio State team is the QB run game is no longer there. And maybe they'll do more with Tate Martell or some other things down the stretch to kind of bring that QB run game. But you take away that zone read QB run game that Ohio State has had a lot of success with, I think it's hurt those tailbacks and what Ohio State does. And I think Ohio State's going to try to find ways to attack Nebraska on the ground because they know, big picture-wise, they need to probably be at least 200 rushing yards per game to be where they want to go and play for a championship. And that hasn't been the case. And Nebraska's rush defense has been suspect. They've stopped the run, though, against Northwestern and Minnesota, Bethune-Cookman the last 3 weeks. But when they played the Wisconsin, the Michigans of the world, they have not played well against the run. Purdue had a little success as well. And the pass rush is the real problem for Nebraska. They have not been able to get to quarterbacks with four-man rushes, and their inability to do that really has hurt the back end of their defense as well.
You know, I'm curious, Sean, what the morale of the Nebraska fan base is out there. How are people viewing, this hire? I know it's still, midway through the first season, so it's not time to jump off the bandwagon, but there were so many expectations for Scott Frost coming home to Nebraska and hopefully getting Nebraska back to an elite level type of program. And obviously this first season has not gone, I think, how anybody hoped it would. So, where are people at with this right now with the status of the program?
Well, I mean, if you watch Adrian Martinez at all, I think you know that everyone's pretty optimistic where it's going. I mean, Adrian Martinez is as good as a freshman quarterback as there is in the country right now. He's outstanding. He's completing 66% of his passes. He runs the ball well. He throws the ball well. He does everything for a true freshman right now, and it's a wonder why Urban Meyer brought him in for an official visit last November. This is a kid that has a chance to be awfully special when it's all said and done at Nebraska. And they've won 2 in a row now, and they should have beat Northwestern. They blew a 10-point lead the week before that on the fourth quarter. So it's turning in the right direction. There's only been really just one game where they were just manhandled, and it's going to take some time. I mean, everybody's on board. There were 90,000 people in that stadium on Saturday for the Bethune-Cookman game. There were 90,000 people there the week before for Minnesota. So the fans are still showing up. The place is full. 25,000 fans traveled to the Northwestern game to watch them on the road play out there. So the support is still as high as it's ever been. I think people know Frost inherited kind of a mess, and it's going to take some time. And I think next year, in year 2, you'll see this program make a much bigger jump.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Martinez. Are they, since he's been back, are they back to using him? Is he full strength? Fully engrossed in that run pass option game, and are they using him to his full strength now?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the Michigan game was September 22nd, so we're 6 weeks past that time. So he's been full go. His last 4 Big Ten games, Adrian Martinez, say Taylor all the time too, has gone for over 400 yards of total offense each game. So he has moved the ball and done a lot. And, he's had a lot of throw for 300 and run for 100 type games. I mean, he's that dangerous and that dynamic. And he's even bigger on the field than you'd envision. I mean, he's a big physical 6'4", 6'5" kid that weighs probably 230 right now. So he runs a legit 4.5, 4.6 40, and he can throw it. I mean, the Minnesota game should tell you all you need to know. He started that game 25 of 29 passing the football. He finished that game, and I think he completed his first 10 passes to start that game. So he's a highly accurate guy. That's not just a run-first athlete that's playing quarterback. He can run it just as well as he can throw it, and that's what's scary. And then you have Scott Frost, who has worked and developed so many great quarterbacks going back to Mackenzie Milton and Marcus Mariota and all the guys he worked with at Oregon. He's really a proven quarterback commodity, kind of like Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer has developed so many guys. Well, Frost, when you go through his quarterbacks he's worked with and developed going back to Oregon and Central Florida, he's got quite a track record now as well. And Adrian Martinez kind of looks like the next guy kind of on the line of his quarterbacks.
Sean Callahan, he's the publisher of Husker Online, the Nebraska rival site. You can also catch his work on Twitter at Sean_Callahan. Sean, my man, I appreciate this update and look forward to speaking with you in the future.
All right. Hey, appreciate it. Have a good one.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Let's chat about some Ohio State basketball here before we wrap up the podcast, as the Buckeyes unofficially unveiled itself to the public on Thursday evening with an 81-63 victory over UNC Pembroke in its first exhibition game. Many of you did not get to watch this game because it was not televised. If you were not within the dozens of people that were in attendance, and I say that jokingly, clearly there were more than dozens of people there, but obviously it was not a very well-attended game. Or if you did not drop the $10 for a monthly subscription on BTN Plus, then you are probably wondering what I had to say about this Ohio State performance against UNC Pembroke. Now, first, all the caveats aside, let's remind ourselves UNC Pembroke is a Division II school, so buyer beware on all of the observations that I would have for a performance like this. But I will also say, first of all, the score is misleading. 81-63 was the final. Ohio State pretty much cleaned up the bottom of the bench for the last 6, 7, 8 minutes of the game. For most of the second half, they were up 24 to 30 points. So Ohio State looked pretty good in this. And I will also say that this UNC Pembroke team is actually pretty good. They were 24-8 last year with a trip to the regional semis in the Division II National Tournament. And they were picked number 1 preseason for their league, which is the Peach Belt Conference. So this is a decent team. They have made the NCAA Division II tournament 5 out of the last 8 seasons. So this was a quality program that Ohio State played on Thursday. First observation that I have about this Ohio State team, and it was a game where nobody really played a lot. They mixed up the minutes. Keyshawn Woods, the graduate transfer from Wake Forest, played 23 minutes. Dwayne Washington, the freshman who is the nephew of former Laker great Derek Fisher, he played 21 minutes. Everybody else played 19 minutes or fewer. So Ohio State really mixed up the rotation. So, I think that kind of messed with the flow of the offense just a little bit. They did have 21 turnovers, which is not good. Now, a lot of those, I think, probably 6 or 7 of them came late in the game when Ohio State was just basically on cruise control with a couple of the walk-ons. Joey Lane, Danny Hummer were both in the game. But overall, here's what impressed me the most about this Ohio State team, and I'll talk about a few of these players here because Ohio State's going to have to get very good very quickly, at least if it wants to protect its record early in the season, because there are some big games coming up. Of course, the Cincinnati game looming large to open the season here on Wednesday night. That is a 6 p.m. game on ESPN. Very much looking forward to that game. I expect a very low-scoring defensive battle. But what I saw in this performance by Ohio State is something that I don't think I've ever seen in all my years of watching basketball. Now, I'm in my late 30s, so I'm certainly not old enough to remember all of the teams that maybe some of you listeners have seen over the years. But I will say this is the first time I can remember an exhibition game where I thought Ohio State was clearly the team that was scrappier and giving more effort. And, this Ohio State club just seems very excitable. If you liked last year's version, the team that went 24-8 and got Ohio State to the second round of the NCAA tournament, then if that kind of effort and intensity really makes you excited to watch Ohio State basketball, then you are in for a treat. Now, I'm not telling you this Ohio State team is going to win another 24 games. I don't think that that's the case. I think they're going to struggle early on with offense. I'm not sure shooting is going to be a strength of this club, and they're certainly not really big up front. But this team clearly, on the give a crap scale, they register very high. They were all over for loose balls. They were hustling for rebounds. They were getting to the rim. They were, excited about big plays, about steals, about diving for loose balls. They were, everybody was patting each other on the back and getting really amped up for those kind of plays. It is a team that clearly has a lot of camaraderie, and they clearly fuel off of one another. At least, based on one exhibition game, you can see the excitement level is through the roof in this team. And I remember some games here, especially the last 10 years. I mean, think about the exhibition games against Findlay and Walsh and some of these teams, who are good teams, by the way. But like a lot of major programs, you expect these teams to come in and they outwork and out-hustle the major programs. Because, I mean, these are exhibition games, so there's more on the line, I think, for a Division II or a Division III or an NAIA club coming in and playing this game. There's more of an energy level for that kind of underdog, even if it is exhibition. You tend to see these teams out-hustle and out-scrap a bigger program like Ohio State. I mean, remember, Lemoyne back a few years back beat Syracuse in the Dome. And you see that sometimes. And it's nothing against Ohio State because this is not unique to the Buckeyes, although they have certainly had issues with motivation and giving effort. Late in Thad Matta's tenure, we saw that as one of the problems. And, I said this on Twitter. I said, one of the things is want to is something you have to recruit. You can't just expect your coaching staff to get the most out of your players and get them. You can't take a guy that just doesn't care. He doesn't GAD. You can't get him to suddenly start giving effort. If he doesn't have it, if he doesn't have that in him, you're not going to get it out of him. You can maximize. Some coaches are better than others at maximizing the energy level and the attitude and the enthusiasm. And I think Chris Holtmann is one of those guys. I think last year we saw him maximize the effort out of his team. But at the same time, even the best coaches, if a guy doesn't care, the best coaches aren't going to be able to make him care. And that's something you've got to look for in the recruiting process, and they have certainly done that with this team. Because like I said, so many years, 10 years now, I think back, Thad Matta being the coach, and I think probably for the last 6, 7, 8 years, we've seen teams that just, they will go through the motions and just kind of go through the process in these exhibitions. And there's always some excitement and, anticipation for these guys to be able to get on the floor and play another opponent when people are in the building and watching. But at the same time, they're dull atmospheres or, sparsely attended. You're not going to expect a huge energy level and excitement level out of a major program playing a Division II or Division III school. But in this case, this is the first time I can remember watching Ohio State basketball where I thought Ohio State was just by far the scrappier, more energetic team. And that's really impressive because, like I said, this is a UNC Pembroke team that is talented. They've got high expectations relative to their division and their league this year. But Ohio State came out and, they certainly had more talent, obviously, but they won the game because they were just, quicker to the ball. They were making smarter plays. They were moving away from the ball. Good cuts to the basket. I really liked what I saw of this Ohio State team. I think, like I said, the biggest question mark for me is I'm not sure how they're going to shoot the ball. They don't have a lot of natural shooters this year. Cameron Williams is gone. Keita Bates-Diop, who blossomed into a great shooter last year, he's gone. So Ohio State needs somebody, whether it's Luther Muhammad, Musa Jallo, Dwayne Washington. These guys have got to step up and make shots. And they're going to have to do it quickly because 2 out of their first 3 games are against Cincinnati and Creighton. And, these are 2 pretty good defensive teams, pretty talented teams. Cincinnati is going to be jazzed up in the reopening of Fifth Third Arena there on Wednesday night. That game is sold out, and that's going to be an impressive atmosphere. Cincinnati plays really good defense. I'm expecting Ohio State to be a great defensive club. That is a game that could be in the low 50s. Coming out early, you expect maybe the defense to be a little bit ahead of the offense for both teams, and both teams, I think, are going to be defensive-oriented teams this year. So I'm really excited about what I see with this Ohio State team. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. They're not going to be perfect out of the gate. They're going to struggle. I think they're going to go through stretches where they don't score a lot of points. But the future is very bright. Micah Potter in 11 minutes had 13 points and 6 rebounds. he looked stronger. He looked more assertive. He looked quicker. We've seen flashes of Potter before, but he looks like a guy that has a potential to break out this year. He looked really good in limited time, 15 minutes off the bench. Jaden Leday, freshman forward, had 9 points and 7 rebounds. He showed some flashes. Luther Muhammad, that guy, man, I tell you what, folks, Luther Muhammad, you are going to enjoy him. He's a guy that's still going to be working through his offensive game as far as making shots consistently, but he is a hound dog on defense. He's always going 100 miles per hour. You're going to love him. He got the start on Thursday night at the 2 guard, and I don't look for him to relinquish that spot anytime in the near future because he looks like the real deal. This team, I'm telling you, the starters, by the way, if you didn't see it, C.J. Jackson, Luther Muhammad, Andre Wesson, Kyle Young, and Caleb Wesson. But this team, it's going to have the first half of the year, I think it's just going to have to hold water, going to have to rely on that defense, that enthusiasm, the rebounding. Some of those spark plays, they're going to need those because I think they're going to go stretches without scoring. But the talent is there. I think by the end of the season, this very well could be a very fun team to watch. But I will make this prediction. I do believe this team, in terms of the scrap factor, is going to be one of the more exciting Ohio State teams to watch in many years. I really see that out of this group. The pat on the backs, if you were keeping score of those, you probably would have run out of pen and paper just by the little tally marks because these guys were getting excited about every little mundane play throughout the course of a game, which is really impressive, like I said, for an exhibition game. So Ohio State, Cincinnati, coming up on Wednesday. They will open the season for real, the big showdown. This is the first time these two teams have played on one another's home floors in 100-some years, okay? They did play back in 2006 in Indianapolis. I was at that game back in what's now Bankers Life Fieldhouse. It was back then it was Conseco Fieldhouse. But they have not played a home game with one another in over 100 years. So be really exciting. Bearcats, Buckeyes, Wednesday night, 6 p.m. ESPN 2. Should be an exciting atmosphere down there at the new renovated Fifth Third Arena. So Ohio State basketball is back. We'll talk a little bit more on Monday previewing that Ohio State-Cincinnati game. But what can you say? Basketball's around the corner. This team, talented, young and inexperienced for sure. A little bit rough around the edges on the offensive side of the ball. But I do think better days lie ahead, if not later this year, then next year certainly, when they have 10 guys back, as well as that incoming freshman class of DJ Carton and E.J. Lydell and Alonzo Gaffney. So great times ahead for the Ohio State basketball program. Anyhow, that will wrap things up. Please catch me on Twitter at KYLam8 if you'd like to talk Ohio State basketball or any of these other subjects we were talking about earlier. Urban Meyer, the college football playoff, Ohio State, Nebraska. We will be back on Monday to preview Ohio State, Cincinnati, as well as talk about what happened this weekend with Ohio State, Nebraska. Catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com, and we are on the archives. You can follow us, subscribe, comment, anything, rate and review, anything you would like to do. You can catch us on SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, as well as Stitcher. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday with Kirk Barton and Ross Fulton to break down the Buckeyes and Cornhuskers. Have a great weekend. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.